welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something really fundamental for bow hunting, arrow penetration. Getting it right is key for success and, ethical harvests.
Absolutely. And we're leaning heavily on the incredible research of Dr. Ed Ashby. His work gives us this incredibly detailed picture of what actually makes an arrow penetrate effectively.
Yeah, we're using his 2007 update as our main guide here. It pulls together years of testing.
It really does. Decades, actually.
It kind of takes you back thinking about guys like Fred Bear and Howard Hill. They knew how crucial penetration was.
Oh, definitely. Bear saying you need an arrow that will crash through where the going is tough.
Exactly. That line just sticks with you.
Yeah.
And Howard Hill just flat out, penetration is the name of the game.
Simple as that. No messing around. And their design showed it, right? Hill's a 3-to-1 ratio head.
Long and skinny, designed to slip through.
Yep. And Bear's original razor head, again, the focus wasn't a huge hole, it was getting deep.
He even thought about those bleeder blades, maybe breaking off on bone to reduce drag. Pretty smart thinking way back then.
It shows a deep understanding, born from countless hours of field. Because hitting the vitals, that's the goal.
And that really is the core issue, isn't it? Shot placement is obviously critical, but you will hit bone sometimes, or thick muscle. It just happens.
It's inevitable, and when it does, deeper penetration means more damage where it counts. Quicker, cleaner kills.
Plus, it seriously bumps up your odds if the shot isn't absolutely perfect, which, let's be honest, happens to everyone now and then.
It does. So this deep dive is all about breaking down those key factors Dr. Ashby identified. He prioritized them, which gives us a really practical way to think about optimizing your arrows.
Okay, so let's get into that framework. Ashby makes it clear this ranking isn't totally rigid, right?
Mm-hmm.
The importance can shift depending on the actual shot.
That's a really important point. It's dynamic, but the overall advice is clear.
Build in as many of these advantages as you possibly can.
Exactly, because you just don't know what that arrow is going to encounter on its way. It's about building a system that works across the board.
So what's at the very top of his list? The number one factor.
Structural integrity. Simple as that, but absolutely critical. It applies to the entire arrow system.
Makes perfect sense. If your broadhead tip curls, or a blade snaps, or the shaft breaks...
Game over. All the other fancy stuff doesn't matter one bit.
He had a stat on that, didn't he? About tip bending.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. Even a tiny, almost invisible bend in the tip. Average penetration loss, 14%.
Yeah, 14% just for a little bend.
It's huge. So yeah, rock-solid components and a scary sharp broadhead edge, those are the non-negotiables, the absolute foundation.
Okay, essential foundation. Structural integrity and sharpness. What's number two?
Arrow flight. He calls it the enabler. Basically, perfect arrow flight is what delivers all the other good stuff effectively.
Right, if the arrow's wobbling or fishtailing.
You're just bleeding energy into the air. All that potential force you built up is wasted before it even gets to the animal.
You need that arrow flying like a dart, straight and true.
Absolutely. Perfect flight maximizes the usable force on impact. But Ashby also notes, even with perfect flight, if the arrow design itself has flaws, it'll still perform poorly on some hits. Flight enables, but it doesn't fix bad design.
Gotcha. So number three on the list.
This one's really interesting. Extreme FOC, front of center.
Okay, define that for us.
So FOC is just the percentage of the arrow's total weight that's in the front half. Ashby breaks it down. Normal is 12% or less. High is 12% to 19%, and then extreme FOC is 19% or greater.
And the big gains come at that extreme level.
That's what his testing showed, yeah. Once you hit 19% or more, especially with arrows that already have other good penetration features, you start seeing jumps of like 40% to upwards of 60% more penetration.
40 to 60%, that's massive.
It's a game changer. And it also seems to help magnify the effect of other factors, second only to arrow flight in that regard.
Okay, so extreme FOC is a big one. What's number four?
Mechanical advantage of the broadhead, or MA.
Mechanical advantage. How does that apply here?
Think of it as efficiency. A broadhead with higher MA does more work cutting and pushing through tissue with the force the arrow delivers. It penetrates easier, basically.
So a slicker design, maybe a longer, narrower profile?
Often, yeah. But it applies across the board. And the key is, the more efficient your overall arrow setup is, the bigger the benefit you get from a high MA broadhead. They work together.
Makes sense. Okay, number five gets pretty specific. The shaft to ferrule diameter ratio.
Yeah, this was a fascinating finding. If your arrow shaft is smaller than the broadhead ferrule specifically, at least 5% smaller.
You get a penetration boost?
Yep. about 10% on average.
Okay, 10% gain. What about the other way around, if the shaft is bigger than the ferrule?
That's where it gets really bad. Ashby found penetration decreases by an average of 30% compared to having them the same diameter.
30% loss.
Yeah.
So wait, the difference between having the shaft slightly smaller versus slightly larger is?
A 40% swing. Huge difference from a relatively small design choice.
Wow. So the advice is pretty clear then.
Absolutely. Never use a shaft bigger than your ferrule. Ideally, make sure it's at least 5% smaller.
Good tip. All right, number 6, arrow mass. Simple weight, right?
Well, technically mass, but yeah, on Earth, weight works. More mass does a couple things. It can actually make your bow a bit more efficient, transferring more energy.
Okay. And the arrow itself.
More mass means more momentum, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And Ashby points out tissue penetration is directly proportional to momentum if everything else is equal.
But it's not just about total momentum.
Right. How that momentum is applied matters. That's where broadhead efficiency comes back in. And also, simple physics, Newton's first law.
An object in motion.
Stays in motion. A heavier arrow just takes more to stop it once it hits resistance, so it penetrates deeper.
So Ashby's recommendation.
Use the heaviest arrow you can that still gives you a trajectory you're comfortable with for your hunting distances. Find that balance.
Okay, factor 7. Edge finish. We touched on sharp, but this is more specific.
Yeah, it's about the type of sharp, not just getting an edge, but getting it smooth. Think shaving sharp, honed smooth, and then strop to polish it even further.
Like mirror polish smooth.
Pretty much. That level of smooth makes a surprising difference, especially in tough, fibrous stuff.
How much difference are we talking?
Compared to just a smoothly filed edge, that polished edge gets about 26% more penetration. And compared to those rougher, serrated hill-type edges, over 60% better.
60%, just from the edge finish.
It's significant. Less friction as it slices. Applies to all broadhead types, too.
All right, number 8, shaft profile.
This compares tapered shafts, parallel shafts, and barrel-tapered shafts.
And the winner is?
Tapered shafts came out on top, about 8% better penetration than parallel.
Okay. And parallel versus barrel?
Parallel was better than barrel tapered too, by about 7%. So the ranking is tapered, then parallel, then barrel.
Interesting. Seems like that taper helps it slip through easier towards the back end.
Seems logical. And again, this applies regardless of whether your shafts are carbon, aluminum, wood, whatever.
Number 9, broadhead and arrow silhouette.
This is basically about smoothness along the whole length. Any bumps, lumps, or rough transitions increase drag. Especially critical if you hit bone.
Keep it smooth and streamlined. Less friction equals better penetration.
Exactly. Fewer ups, downs, bumps, and lumps, as Ashby puts it. He also mentions that extra slickness helps, too.
Which leads right into shaft finish itself.
Right. Now, he admits they couldn't precisely measure friction coefficients in, bloody tissue. It's complex.
Sure. But the general advice.
Go for the smoothest, slickest shaft finish you can get. Every little bit helps reduce friction.
He did mention one specific coating, didn't he?
Yeah, Teflon. Specifically, he tested the Eclipse broadhead, which was Teflon coated. It showed a 12% average penetration increase, but only on soft tissue hits.
12% on soft tissue, but no help on bone.
Correct. Didn't seem to make a difference once bone was involved. So the main takeaway is still minimize any bumps or rough spots on the arrow's profile.
Except for that step down behind the ferrule, which you want.
Right. That intentional step down can actually help.
Okay, number 10, type of edge bevel. Single versus double. This one seems to generate a lot of discussion.
It does. And Ashby's findings here are pretty compelling, especially regarding bone impacts.
What did he find?
In his tests, single-bevel broadheads showed significantly better penetration than identical double-bevel heads in 100% of bone impacts.
100%. Wow. How much better?
The increase ranged from 14% up to, in some cases, 58%. Huge difference when bone is hit.
Any benefit in soft tissue?
The data was suggestive, possibly pointing to an advantage there too, but the bone impact results were definitive.
What's the mechanism? Why are they better on bone?
It seems to be rotation. Single bevels force the arrow to rotate as it penetrates. This creates torque, and Ashby actually observed frequent massive bone splits with single bevels.
Splitting the bone apart.
Exactly, something he never saw with double bevel heads in the tests. They tended to cut or punch through, but not split like that.
So the recommendation leans towards single bevels then?
Yep. Based on his findings, yes. Because they showed a clear upside on bone hits, which happen often, and no downside in his tests. He even speculated the rotation might help stabilize flight.
Interesting. Number 11, tip design. the very point of the broadhead.
Hugely important, again, especially on bone. And the hands-down winner in Ashby's tests was the Tanto tip.
The tanto, like the knife blade shape.
Yep, it had the lowest damage rate, meaning it held up best. And it penetrated bone way better than other
It's
designs.
much better.
Get this, 110% better penetration in bone than the worst performer, which was a concave tip. And still 27.5% better than the second best tip, which was a simple round nose.
That's a massive advantage for the tanto tip. Does it help with hitting bone at an angle?
Yes, that's another key finding. The Tato shape had the lowest tendency to skid or glance off bone during angled impacts.
What about needle-sharp tips?
They might resist skidding similarly, Ashby thought, but they tended to get damaged easily. He also cautions not to confuse a true needle tip with conical or standard pyramid points. The Tanto really stood out.
Okay, finally, number 12. This one sounds specific. Arrow mass above the heavy bone threshold.
Right, it's ranked low overall because it doesn't matter much if you only hit soft tissue.
But if you hit heavy bone,
Then its importance skyrockets. It jumps way up the list, right behind structural integrity and maybe flight quality. It becomes critical.
and there's a specific weight threshold.
Yes, Ashby puts it at or very near 650 grains of total arrow weight.
650 grains.
Below that threshold, even big increases in impact force don't seem to help much with busting through heavy bone. It's like there's a wall there.
So under 650, more speed or poundage doesn't overcome heavy bone reliably.
That's what the data suggests, which is why Ashby himself says he won't hunt with less than 650, just because bone hits are so common.
Does FOC affect that threshold?
Yeah.
Like, can extreme FOC lower it?
Interestingly, no. Extreme FOC showed great benefits elsewhere, but it didn't seem to change that 650 grain heavy bone threshold.
It's also interesting where arrow force derived from the bow falls on the list quite low.
Yeah, that surprises some people. More draw weight or a faster bow does increase force, but usually only modestly.
The bigger gains come from the arrow itself.
Exactly. Optimizing all these other factors we've discussed, structural integrity, FOC, MA, edge finish, single bevel, tanto tip, mass, etc., yields far greater penetration increases than just cranking up your draw weight a few pounds.
That's a really key takeaway for anyone listening. Focus on the arrow system.
Definitely. He also mentioned a few other factors that are harder to nail down with precise numbers.
Like what?
Things like the quality of the broadhead steel, which affects how well the edge holds up, total cutting edge length, more edges mean more hemorrhage potentially, the blade angle, how steep it is, even the angle of the bevel itself, they all play a role.
So when you add up all the factors that were quantified, what's the potential overall gain?
It's pretty staggering. Comparing an arrow optimized with these features versus one without them, assuming both have perfect integrity and flight, the penetration increase ranges from 90% up to nearly 200%.
200%. That's basically tripling your penetration.
That's the implication. Think about it. An arrow that penetrates 5 inches could potentially penetrate 15, or one that gets 10 could get 30.
And that doesn't even include the harder to measure stuff like the difference between, say, 450 grains and 700 grains, or the MA differences or shaft slickness.
Correct. So that 200% figure might actually be conservative when you compare a truly optimized setup to a poorly designed one.
And these tests were done simulating really tough conditions, right?
Yeah, worst case stuff. Heavy bone impacts, like hitting the rib of a mature Cape buffalo. Conditions far tougher than most hunters typically encounter with deer or elk.
So the message from all this research seems crystal clear.
Overwhelmingly. If you're serious about bow hunting success and making ethical kills, you absolutely need to prioritize these penetration-enhancing factors in your arrow setup.
It really encourages you to look at your own arrows, doesn't it? Go through this list and see where you can make improvements.
For sure. Evaluate your broadheads, your FOC, your shaft profile, your total weight. Even small tweaks across several areas can add up to a big difference in how that arrow performs when it matters most.
And if listeners want to go even deeper, where can they find Ashby's full reports?
The best place is the Dr. Ashby Reports forum over on www.treadgang.com. All the original research papers are there, plus lots of discussion. It's an amazing resource. Really boils down to this: move beyond just thinking about individual components. What happens when you take a truly systematic approach? When every single design choice is driven by maximizing penetration.
How much could that change things for you in the field? Your confidence, your recovery rate?
Exactly. It's a powerful thought to consider as you set up your arrows for your next hunt.